Sharks are some of the most iconic animals to ever live on our planet. Ranging from the smallest of dwarf lantern sharks to the largest of whale sharks, these creatures are a staple of our modern oceans. None, however, are more iconic than two of the most famous sharks of all time, the swift mako and the mighty great white shark. These two ocean predators are masters of their domains and are part of a family known as Lamnidae, otherwise known as the mackerel sharks. But these two animals are not alone in their family, and in fact, another far more obscure genus also swims the oceans of our world. Lending its name to the entire family, this genus of shark and its two species resemble its much more famous great white counterpart, but at a fraction of the size. We are excited to welcome you all to an Epoch Now Shark Week special on the Porbeagle and Salmon shark, the dwarf white sharks. Having been around for millions of years, both sharks have indeed crossed paths with early humans at several points during prehistory. Norwegian archaeologist Leif Inge Astveit found the remains of multiple Porbeagle shark teeth on Norway's northwestern coast, dating to about 4,500 years ago. One particular settlement, Nordlandsoya, had over 150 Porbeagle teeth scattered about, indicating that humans residing in the settlement may have been hunting Porbeagles for quite some time, perhaps even before the establishment of Nordlandsoya in particular. Astveit speculated that the sharks provided food and oil for the settlers, along with their thick hide potentially being used for clothing and their teeth being used both for weapons and as ornaments to indicate a high social status. While known by humans for thousands of years, the Porbeagle was first scientifically described in 1788 by French naturalist Pierre-Joseph Bonneterie, based on a previous account in 1769 by Welsh naturalist Thomas Pennant, who gave it the scientific name Squalus nassus, a name meaning shark nose in Latin. Bonneterie's description was added to the encyclopedic and methodical table of the Three Kingdoms of Nature. In 1816, French zoologist Georges Cuvier placed the Porbeagle into its own subgenus known as Lamna, which became an official genus later on. The word Lamna itself is of ancient Greek origin, meaning fish of prey, and is derived from the Lamia, a child-eating monster in Greek mythology. As for its sister species, while there is no current archaeological record of early humans hunting salmon sharks, it is not unlikely, as sharks along with other marine animals have been hunted by both our species and even Neanderthals, as evidenced by findings in Portugal, albeit a region within the Porbeagle's range. Ironically, the salmon shark used to be grouped with the Porbeagle until 1947, when the species was described by American ichthyologist Carl Levitt Hubbs and William Irvine Follett, being given the name L. ditropus. In between the Porbeagle and the salmon shark's descriptions, several extinct species of Lamna were uncovered and described from 1848 to 1894. These two relatively obscure lamnids offer interesting insight into the family that the great white belongs to, and despite their strikingly similar appearances, show great level of diversity among mackerel sharks, including in size. While belonging to a family with some exceptional heavyweights, both Lamna sharks are relatively small when compared to their rather famous cousin, the great white shark. While the two closely resemble the great white in appearance, what makes the salmon shark specifically more distinct is its shorter conical snout and secondary keels on the caudal base of its tail, which the great white lacks. The salmon shark is generally darker in coloration than the great white, ranging from dark bluish-gray to black, with a white underbelly sparsely covered in dark blotches. In terms of size, the salmon shark averages at 305 centimeters or 10 feet in length and weighs 450 kilograms or 992 pounds. In contrast, the Porbeagle shark has a longer snout and is slightly lighter in color, ranging from dark blue to gray. Like the salmon shark, the Porbeagle also has secondary keels on the caudal base. There are, however, some deviations in color between the northern porbeagles and the southern porbeagles. The northern porbeagle's underside is predominantly white, while the underside of the southern porbeagle's head is darker, while the abdomen is also white but with dark blotches. When compared to the salmon shark's size, the porbeagle seems to be longer but lighter, as they can average lengths of 365 centimeters or 12 feet and a weight of up to 230 kilograms or 500 pounds. And while not the largest sharks in the world, they're still relatively impressive in terms of size relative to humans, but are still dwarfed by some of the more iconic members of their family. The Lamna genus belongs to the family Lamnidae, commonly known as white sharks. The family itself is part of an order known as Lamniformes, which are colloquially known as mackerel sharks. This order consists of various well-known sharks such as the seal-hunting gray whites, the swift mako sharks, both being members of Lamnidae themselves, thresher sharks, sand tiger sharks, or grey nurse sharks as they're known in Australia, and the basking shark, just to give a few examples. Alongside them are several extinct species, the most notable of which being the massive Otodus megalodon of the Miocene and the even more ancient mosasaur-eating Cretoxyrhina. The order also consists of several deep-sea oddities such as the goblin shark and the rare megamouth shark. Their relation to the great white shouldn't come as much of a surprise, as both the salmon shark and the porbeagle resemble shrunken-down variants of the former. They are, however, distinct species and are separated from the great white through their genus placements. When it comes to their direct relations to other lamnid sharks, there have been varying answers. One hypothesis argued that Lamna and Carcharodon, the great whites, are a sister taxa to each other, making porbeagles and salmon sharks especially close to their massive lookalike, while another hypothesis argues that Carcharodon and Isurus, the mako sharks, are a sister group, with Lamnas being closely related and perhaps being the most ancestral of all the still living genera in the family. The earliest known lamniforms date to the early Cretaceous. However, a 2023 paper argued for the placement of a Jurassic-dated genus, Paleocarcharius, as a basal lamniform due to similarities in their teeth, thereby extending the order's evolutionary history from the Cretaceous into the Jurassic. However, in the following years, scientists would go on to argue that it is closer to carpet sharks, primarily the wobbegong family Orectolobidae, due to morphological similarities. During the Cretaceous, lamniformia was quite diverse, encompassing various families and species, including the aforementioned Cretoxyrhina, along with sharks such as Squalicorax, early goblin shark relatives such as Capanorhynchus, and Aquilolamnids, or eagle sharks. Following the KPG mass extinction, the lamniforms initially began to decline in diversity, only to bounce back during the later Cenozoic era with many modern lineages, among them being Lamna. Lamna itself first evolved around 65 to 45 million years ago from the Paleocene to the Eocene epochs. Our oldest porbeagle remains seem to date to the Miocene epoch, with one particular specimen being uncovered at the Upper Miocene Breda Formation in the Netherlands. Additionally, prehistoric remains of porbeagles have also been uncovered in Chile and Spain, with potential porbeagle teeth uncovered in Belgium. However, those may belong to a different prehistoric Lamna species altogether. Teeth resembling those of a porbeagle were uncovered in Lee Creek, North Carolina, but are more likely labeled as belonging to a sand tiger shark or an undeterminate species altogether. Additionally, teeth of a Lamna shark, also closely resembling the porbeagle, were uncovered in the La Meseta Formation at the Seymour Island of Antarctica, dating to the Eocene epoch. There has, however, been issues in accurately discerning fossilized porbeagle remains, as over the course of their growth stages, porbeagle teeth vary in appearance to resembling those of other sharks such as Carcharrhiniforms, in order that includes hammerheads and tiger sharks, and fellow lamniforms, the thresher sharks. As for the salmon shark, its fossil record and evolutionary history doesn't seem to be as well known as the porbeagles, which is further exacerbated by its former classification as the latter species. What is known, however, is that both salmon sharks and porbeagles are sister species within their respective genus. However, the date of divergence between the two species is still to be determined. Overall, these two species provide an interesting insight into the evolution and diversification of the mackerel sharks, both from their humble beginnings during the age of the dinosaurs to their rise in prominence during the age of mammals, an age that porbeagle and salmon sharks still live through to this very day. Like most of their kin, both lamna species are oceanic, with the salmon shark being restricted to the North Pacific, with a range that stretches from Japan and the Russian Far East, all the way to Alaska, British Columbia, and the west coast of the United States. The porbeagle is more spread out, being found predominantly in the North Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and a limited Pacific range which consists of southernmost Chile and Argentina, Australia, and the islands of New Zealand. Much like the great white, these lamna sharks are also capable of keeping their body temperature higher than the water surrounding them when compared to other cartilaginous fish. This is especially useful for the salmon shark and porbeagles, as they're known to inhabit the Arctic and subantarctic regions of the world. Surprisingly, while not observed entering fresh water like bull sharks, there have been cases of porbeagles crossing into brackish estuaries in Argentina. Both species are also migratory, moving from one part of their range to the next, usually due to either prey migration or mating season. Salmon sharks mate from the summer to the autumn seasons, while porbeagles mate from autumn to winter. Scientists are usually able to determine if a female of either species has mated due to the presence of bite marks inflicted by the male. Much like the gray white, both species give birth to live young as opposed to laying eggs. Salmon sharks give birth in late spring, while porbeagles give birth anywhere from the spring to the summer. Both sharks also exhibit a peculiar behavior in which they segregate based on sex and size. For salmon sharks, males occupy the western part of the Pacific, while females reside on the east, with larger salmon sharks having the northernmost distribution. This is likely to avoid cannibalism on juveniles by adult males. The prey of both sharks largely consists of other fish, along with cephalopods and marine mammals. Salmon sharks predominantly feed on Pacific salmon, Alaskan cod, squids, mackerel, lanternfish, and even other sharks like the spiny dogfish. They have also been documented feeding on sea otters. Porbeagles also feed on much of the same species within their locality. Salmon sharks have also been known to regurgitate any indigestible objects that they happen to eat. This is what helped potentially explain a decline of king salmon in Alaska, as several tracking devices recorded unusually warm temperatures for the area, which scientists attributed to be from the shark's stomach. Despite being predators, the porbeagle and salmon sharks are not without their fair share of threats. In August of last year, we had our first recorded instance of a porbeagle being preyed on by an Atlantic gray seal, an ironic turn of events given the porbeagle's larger relative being famous for hunting seals. Great whites also occupy the range of these two, though their interactions are sparsely documented. In 2020, an exceptionally long porbeagle from North Carolina went missing after being outfitted with a tracking device 6 months prior. Based on the analysis of the location, water temperature, and depth in which the shark had disappeared, scientists speculated that it was killed by a great white, marking it as possibly the first documented instance of a great white shark hunting a porbeagle. Orcas also run the possibility of preying on porbeagles, especially given various accounts of them hunting great whites, but currently there's no documented instances of said interaction. During prehistory, porbeagles would have encountered various exotic fauna on the coasts and the depths. These could have included early cetaceans such as the massive sperm whale Leviathan and the strange Odobenocetops. Along with those, porbeagles would have likely crossed paths with the massive megalodon and perhaps other otodus sharks. They could have also encountered several semi-aquatic mammals from the Miocene to the Pliocene, among them possibly being Thalassocnus, the giant marine sloth. Due to the ever-evolving biodiversity along Patagonia and the remainder of the porbeagle's range, it's easy to imagine the vast array of prehistoric life they could have encountered both far off into the sea and perhaps even off into the coastline, along with pondering what terrestrial predators may have potentially scavenged off their washed-up remains. As for the sister taxon, due to an overlapping distribution, it's possible that salmon sharks could have encountered the extinct stellar sea cows back when they still occupied the Bering Sea. At this moment, there's currently no evidence to suggest predation by land predators on either shark species, but due to occupying ranges where polar bears, various northernmost coastal brown bear subspecies, and Vancouver Island's famous sea wolves reside, it's not impossible to assume that said predators may feed on these sharks, even if purely off of scavenging. Despite their less impressive size, these two lambda species have cemented themselves as apex predators, living up to the legacy of their more well-known relative in the extreme reaches of our planet. Both species vary not only in range, size, and appearance, but also in conservation status. The salmon shark is listed by the IUCN as least concern, while the porbeagle is believed to be worse off, categorized as anywhere from near threatened to vulnerable, but they still share many of the same issues. Both species are subjected to fishing and are harvested for their parts to be used as food or oil. If their entire bodies aren't harvested, then at far worst, these sharks have their fins removed and are thrown back to the depths to drown. Due to having a slow growth and birth rate compared to other sharks, salmon sharks face a high risk of overfishing, with climate change also playing a heavy impact due to juveniles being sensitive to changes in water temperature. In Japan, salmon sharks run the risk of being a bycatch, meaning that they're an unintended catch by fishermen and can be viewed as a nuisance by them due to their ability to badly damage fishing gear. However, they are still considered food in Japan, with one city called Kesennuma even making sashimi out of their hearts. Following the 70s and 80s, there was an increase of washed-up juvenile salmon sharks along the United States Pacific coast, possibly due to ongoing human development where their nurseries would be located. In Alaska and British Columbia, salmon sharks are a common target for sport fishing, with Alaskan fishermen reporting a decline in salmon shark numbers. And as a majority of salmon sharks in North America are females, this could lead to an uneven sex ratio and impact the population increase of the species. The porbeagle struggles largely vary from region to region. In the western part of the North Atlantic, the porbeagle is considered endangered, while critically endangered in the eastern part of the North Atlantic that spreads to the Mediterranean Sea. However, it does seem to be doing far better in the southern hemisphere, as New Zealand lists its porbeagle population as not threatened and fishing for it is regulated. Regulated fisheries for the porbeagle are also present in some parts of the northern hemisphere, primarily in Canada and Norway. In a similar vein to the salmon shark, the porbeagle is also a bycatch in some parts of the world, predominantly along the Indian Ocean. The porbeagle is, however, severely impacted along the Mediterranean Sea, with the IUCN listing it as possibly extinct in Spain, France, and Italy. However, an article covering the decline of sharks in the Mediterranean mentions a restricted range of porbeagles situated along the Italian peninsula, possibly due to the presence of a nursery within that region. In 2011, the European Union made it illegal to hunt porbeagles in their waters. By 2012, it was added to Norway's red list, and by 2014 was given complete protection in the country, making it so that porbeagles caught in Norway and in the countries that make up the European Union must be released. While steps have been taken to help ensure the survival of these species, the threat of further decline and extinction is still present, with the porbeagles in particular potentially suffering extirpation in one portion of their range. Like the rest of their kin, these sharks are vital for the stability of the ecosystems that encompass our vast oceans. Maintaining these two also helps to preserve their ancient genus, hailing from a time when Earth began to recover following the dinosaurs' extinction. With several countries establishing regulations to protect these sharks from being overfished and exploited, to various conservation groups working to preserve them and other sharks, and the environmental groups fighting to nullify the effects of climate change, perhaps we will be capable of preserving the porbeagle and salmon shark, the dwarf white sharks. Thank you all for watching our video dedicated to both sharks within the Lamna genus, the porbeagle and salmon sharks. We hope you've enjoyed this video as much as we did and look forward to seeing you in the next Shark Week special. This video was directed and narrated by myself, RangoGamer, scripted by the Primal Earth and myself, edited by CrimsonAcro, MikeMC9797, the Primal Earth, Smoogoli, and myself. The graphic designer for this video was Mephilas Seijin101 for the shark models and animations. And lastly, the researcher for this video was myself. Additionally, in the spirit of Shark Week and shark conservation, we've decided to use this video to support an organization dedicated to the conservation of the two Lamna species and all their shark relatives. Based in Sausalito, California, Shark Stewards is dedicated to protecting endangered sharks and rays from various threats, including overfishing and fin trades, along with establishing protected marine areas. With their help, the porbeagle shark was placed under the CITES Appendix 2 listing, thereby regulating the trade of the species. By donating to them and other shark conservancies, you can help play a part in preserving the many shark species still swimming amongst the vast seas and rivers today, along with the porbeagle and salmon shark. And with that, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all next time on Epoch Now.